Okay, here we are for the next video in Unit 2 on population. Today we're talking about total fertility rate, sometimes abbreviated as TFR. Sometimes this chapter reminds me a lot about alphabet soup. You got CBR, CDR, TFR, IMR. You really need to know what all of these abbreviations stand for. Infant mortality rate, crude birth rate, crude death rate, total fertility rate, so on and so forth. So what is the total fertility rate? It's a measurement, it's a piece of quantitative data, and it tells us the average number of babies that are born to women of childbearing age. Generally speaking, in the world today, we consider childbearing age to be between the ages of 15 and 45 years old. The more developed a country is, and the more opportunities for women that there are, fertility will drop. You should know as you work through the geo-inquiry for world population that there are trends going on all over the world, regardless of religions and ethnicities and races and nationalities, that fertility is dropping all over the world. Even in countries with high fertility, even in countries with low fertility, fertility is generally dropping. In the United States, it's been holding fairly constant, but that's kind of a culturalism for American families. Again, mom, dad, 2 kids, and a dog. It's very common for American families to have 2 children. But if you think about Mr. Turner, don't forget, my grandmother in rural Tennessee got married when she was 16 in the 1930s, and she had 7 kids. But all of her 7 children had no more than 3, and most had 2. So I have a lot of cousins, but it could have been a lot more. So when you think about fertility, we also talk about what they call replacement level fertility. And that's going to be a number that's not exactly 2, it's actually 2.1, because there is the sad reality that some babies might die before their first birthday. So the 2.1, the 0.1 accounts for infant mortality. Here's a cool map, and this is very similar, of course, to what you worked on in the geo-inquiry. You can see that the darker the red color, that's a kind of, I don't know, salmon, don't make fun of my disability, but that pinkish, reddish looking color is fertility of 4 and higher. You can clearly see the parts of the world where fertility rates are much higher. Richer countries, much lower fertility. Poorer countries, much higher fertility. Notice that Latin America in general, fertility is coming way down. Even in South Asia, fertility is coming way down. What you'll see is that even in countries like Bangladesh, fertility nowadays is about 2.1. That's not all that much higher than the United States at 1.9. And this is where we talk about that trend. Look at this quantitative data and look at all of the fertility rates dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping. Unless you're in sub-Saharan Africa, these numbers are really starting to conform to this ideal 2-child family. So we still have high fertility in the poorest countries. And again, there's another really interesting statistic. And we'll talk in just a second about fertility and how it relates to infant mortality. In Europe, historically, we had a demographic change over time that fertility used to be very high, and today it's very low. So geographers and demographic statisticians predict that the same kind of a trend will be occurring in other less developed parts of the world in the current time and in the future. And so far, that seems to be true. But this demographic change is very fundamental because it gives us this demographic transition model where we go from a period of very high fertility, but with a lot of deaths and high birth rate, high death rate, and we transition over time to a period of low births and low deaths. So it's very important that we see that demographic change in Europe is going to be the basis or the model for what we will predict will be happening in all parts of the world. Remember that on your skill sheet that you've got a picture of on your phone, the whole first column is talking about models, theories, and concepts, right? This is the idea of the demographic transition model. So the guy named Warren Thompson created this model, and he said that based on the experiences of the white European colonizer type countries, that there were these 4 theoretical stages of population cycle. In the beginning, the birth rates and the death rates are both going to be high. At the end, they're both going to be low. And in the middle, you're going to get the so-called transition, where death rates are going to drop first, birth rates are going to stay high, but over time, families start having less kids because less children are dying. So then the birth rates will fall in stage 3. Ultimately, by stage 4, you're going to be low and low. Today, many geographers are saying that this has now advanced to a 5th stage. Because of longevity, because of life expectancy, because people in rich countries are living so long, there's now this fifth stage where the birth rate is very low, but the death rate is now actually higher than the birth rate. And the reason why is because elderly people tend to die. And so the death rate will creep back up. So where's the transition? It's in stages 2 and 3. Here's what it looks like. Notice at the bottom, we have historical examples contemporary examples of actual countries that fit these different stages. Notice there are no countries in the world today that are in stage 1. No country in the world has a high birth rate and a high death rate canceling each other out. It's important that you see in stage 1, there is no rate of increase. The rate of increase is low. Why, or even no? Because the birth rate and the death rate are going to be the same. Remember, rate of natural increase, you saw that in the slideshow already. The formula for that is the birth rate minus the death rate divided by 10 so that we can get it to be a percentage. If the birth rate and the death rate are both high, they're canceling each other out. Why would the death rate be so high? Again, that's mostly because of disease. Later in the slideshow, we're going to talk about the epidemiologic transition. In stage 2, the birth rate stays high, the death rate starts to fall. Why? Medical advances, better food, cleaner water, safer working conditions, vaccinations and immunizations. All across the world today, even the poorest countries are moving out of stage 2 and towards stage 3. Their death rates are falling or are already low. Their birth rates will start to decline, and that takes them into stage 3, where the birth rates are now very low. The average woman is now having about 2 children per woman, and now suddenly the birth rate is coming down, and it's going to come back together in conjunction with the death rate, and again, go to a cycle of low, low, where there's no natural increase because the birth rate and the death rate are effectively canceling each other out. Again, notice the country examples, notice the description of these indicators, these socioeconomic conditions, economic, sociocultural, political, and environmental. And again, the trend, if you see this on the Geo Inquiry, the trend is that this is happening all over the world today. So again, this elusive stationary population level, this idea that we would get to replacement level fertility, that moms and dads would effectively only replace themselves. Historically, we had 4 children, 5 children families, and a lot of kids died. Today, we see a lot of 2 children families, and babies aren't dying nearly as often. So I'm going to show you a video next week. This guy is a Swedish demographer. His name was Hans Rosling. He wrote an amazing book that I read about a year or so ago. And this book was, Bill Gates bought a copy of it for every graduating college senior in America. And I'm going to talk about it next week. I don't want to spoil it too much, but I'm going to show you this video called Don't Panic. And it's really about this idea of trying to get the world to get to this idea of replacement level fertility. When we're talking birth rate and death rate, we also sometimes talk about ZPG and what we call zero population growth. Be careful. This does not mean no babies. If you had 0 births, you'd actually be in a negative rate of growth because remember, you may be able to artificially prevent births, but you can't prevent deaths. So CBR, CDR being equal is ZPG. You can't have 0 births. SPL has been elusive though. Richer countries have slowed down maybe even too much. And yes, some of the lesser developed countries are still having a lot of fertility, but the reality is they're coming down too. So we know that the Earth's population is still growing. We know that we're going to pass 8 billion probably by the time you guys finish college. We know that the Earth is probably going to be about 10 billion by mid-century. Remember, I may not see that with you, but the reality is that the growth rate is slowing down because fertility is coming down, birth rates are coming down, and we're prolonging life. Hans was fond of saying that old people tend to die, and sadly, he fulfilled his own kind of prognostication. He passed away. He had pancreatic cancer, and his son Ola is now taking over his work as an educator and a health educator, especially a demographer. And he gives great TED Talks, and you can follow him on social media. But again, we'll be talking about Hans's book. It's called Factfulness, and it's all about the facts of population statistics, not just the quantitative data, but the qualitative nature of that data. So here are a couple of really cool pictures. Essentially, red and blue here is the demographic transition that I already explained. But the green, and I think that's green, that's the rate of natural increase. Notice that when birth rates and death rates cancel each other out, there's very little increase, if any at all. In stage 2, where the death rate starts dropping, the rate of growth starts to accelerate. And in fact, early on, it's explosive growth because the births are still very high and the deaths are falling. By stage 3, the birth rate's coming down, the death rate is already low. Because the births are slowing, it also slows the rate of natural increase. By the time you get to stage 4, the birth rate and the death rate are canceling each other out, and there's low growth again. Remember, a 5th stage would mean that the birth rate is low and the death rate now starts to go higher because of all of the elderly people that are starting to pass on. So here is a good example of certain hypothetical countries. This is a country, and we haven't really done age-sex distributions yet, so I don't want to confuse you too much. But a country with a really wide base like this is a lot of children. Look at the ages over here on the side. So this is a country where birth rates are very high, the death rate is much lower, the rate of increase is pretty high. It's over 2%. That means that their country is going to double in less than 35 years. And there you see that population growth is really rapid, that big 45-degree line going up towards the edge. Here's a country that's still growing, but starting to grow slower. The birth rate and the death rate are both coming down. The rate of increase that had been growing pretty fast, also coming down. Population had been growing over time, but it's starting to level off. Here's an example of a country that is even more stabilized. As the elderly people are becoming more prevalent, less children are being born. The birth rate and the death rate are canceling each other out. The rate of increase is slowing to almost zero. And again, population has almost stopped growing. So the key is, will all of these poor countries follow suit? So far, we think that almost every country will buy in and will try to adopt this ideal 2-child family. But some countries are still pushing for higher fertility, either because they want big militaries or because they see the value of having children to do work. If there's different societies and different cultures, then sometimes fertility can still be very high. But again, the overall trend is generally good, that even in the countries with high fertility, like a Niger, like Nigeria, like Cote d'Ivoire, like Cameroon, that fertility is coming down. It may not be 2, it may be 3, it may be 2.5, but in many of these countries, we see that fertility is coming down. In the United States, I told you we're the only industrialized country that's still growing. This is a kind of a funny meme of the Statue of Liberty that's pregnant. American women, more unlike any other country in the world, think about mom. She probably has 2 amazing jobs or difficult jobs. She's not only working, she's also working at home. And if your house is anything like my house, we may try to help mom, but let's be honest, we don't help mom nearly as much as we should. So, maybe give mom a hug and a kiss, because if we had to pay her for the work that she did, trust me, we couldn't afford her. At least that's what my mom used to tell us. Hope you enjoyed slideshow 5. If you have any questions, shoot me a text on Remind. Definitely come in and talk about it. As you do the geo inquiry for the next couple of days, try to remember all of these words like total fertility, infant mortality, crude birth rate, crude death rate, rate of natural increase, all of these quantitative statistics, and be able to use the maps to observe patterns and trends and be able to draw conclusions.